Norman, how we doing?
Good, thank you, Mr. John. Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. So have you been out running this morning in the rain?
Yes, no, in the rain and inside my home.
Now, Carmen, it might rain during
Yes,
the marathon. Are you prepared for that?
no,
No.
I think I will bring my umbrella.
Well, wait a minute. Is your husband going to carry the umbrella next to you while you're running?
Yes,
That's a good husband. I think it's a good idea.
I
Or
hope so.
is he going to be on a bicycle?
No, running behind
Really?
me.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that.
No, I try to run when with a vest with some weights, and maybe this could be help me in the marathon.
Okay, but have you practiced in the rain before?
No,
Okay, yeah, because it definitely could rain.
yeah.
So you definitely could have bad conditions. Who knows?
And my son will get married this July,
Okay,
and I'm very nervous.
but is he getting married here in Cincinnati or in somewhere else?
Yes, here in Florence.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's good news. Well, congratulations about that.
Thank you.
So, are you nervous because what?
Because I will be with a lot of people that I don't know about them,
Yeah.
and I only know the her family for
Uh-huh.
the girlfriend.
Yeah.
They are very nice, but I'm really nervous.
Well, I mean I mean honestly that's common. I mean, when my wife and I got married, we had it in her hometown, and we basically just invited the whole town, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, I only knew probably 20% of the people. I mean, so most of the time, Carmen will just be smiling, right?
Yes.
That's it. Yeah, that's the most important thing. Just smile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, still though, that's pretty exciting. Okay.
Yeah. And next his wedding, he will go to Spain from, I don't know what the name, Despliegue. He's in the Navy. He's
Okay.
now in Texas.
Right.
He's working with Marines and soldiers,
Uh huh.
ejército. And after married, he will go to Spain.
Okay. So you mean like for his honeymoon, or just because he's for?
No, for work.
Oh, so he's being um like assigned, like being, we might say deployed, or at least, yeah. This is
Yes,
like, yeah.
for
Now,
6 months.
is this now? How long has he been in the military?
3 years.
Okay, so this is not his first tour.
No,
Okay,
no.
okay.
He the last time he stayed in Dubai,
Oh, okay,
and 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 when he came back, he went to Texas.
okay. Yeah, I mean that's pretty common. Okay, all right. Wow, he's a busy guy.
Yes.
Yeah, getting married and heading out. So, hey, Sakurako, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, fine. Doing fine. It's a pretty rainy day.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you like rainy days, Sakurako?
When I drink, staying my home,
Uh-huh.
that's okay for me. Like going outside,
Yeah.
the rainy day was bad. It's bad, but
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I don't know if you can hear it, but I live right next to Dixie Highway, and I have been hearing
mm,
ambulances and fire trucks
oh
basically,
really?
yeah, all morning. So yeah. So in this case, maybe it's good that we're online, right? We don't have to.
Mm, yeah,
So
it's better.
Yeah, I think so. All right, guys. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully, we'll have a few other people join us. It's always hard when you take a break in the middle of a session. Some people forget, or maybe you're a little busy. But anyway, guys, I'm glad you're back. So here we are. It is Wednesday, March 6th. So we're kind of thinking of this as the next part of our session, or the next session. So I will say to everyone, welcome back. But really, we're just continuing, things that we started last session, and of course, back in the fall. But the idea of this course, again, remember, we really had two purposes, teaching reading skills, but also thinking about vocabulary. So as we progress in this particular session, we're focusing more and more on reading skills. Of course, we're going to continue to remember the vocabulary and things as we continue through the readings. But today we're starting to look at what we do after we read information. So again, we're using the same articles that we started with last session, the same 3 articles. In fact, we're going to work backwards. We're going to start this session with the value of sleep, right? That was the article we finished last session. And then we're going to kind of go backwards until we reach the flu facts at the end of this session. So our goal here really for this session is to talk about what do we do after we read, and especially thinking about how these types of readings are organized. So that's what we're going to get into more detail with here for this session. So again, today we're just kind of reviewing some basic things, and then we're going to use our article to demonstrate some of the ideas that we're talking about. And then as you can see through week 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're just going to continue to progress through the readings, exploring different ideas of reading structure. Okay? So that's what we're looking at here this morning. So again, as we've been discussing throughout the whole year, really, is the idea of active reading. And as we've discussed in previous classes, things we do before we read, things we do while we read, and we'll still do a lot of those things. But now we're starting to move into things we do after we read. And I think that's important because for students, it's hard sometimes to understand what you're reading. You often have to get the experience of reading it, and then you can start organizing our ideas. But think about what we do before we read, right? Again, I'm just going to review these things very quickly. So again, we look at the title, we look at the pictures, the headings, anything that we can see before we read. Often that will help us to identify what kind of reading we're looking at. In fact, we also said skimming the text, especially at the beginning, might give us a basic idea of what the genre of the reading is, and gives us a chance to think about our own experience, right? To activate our own previous knowledge and to begin to make predictions, what we are going to see. Now, we've done all of that already, so we're not going to review all of that. But of course, we still want to remind you that we're focusing on vocabulary as well. So that's a big part of what we do. Now, last session, we started talking about things we do while we read, right? During the reading process. We use that think aloud strategy. Again, very helpful to talk through the text, asking ourselves questions, using the genre or even the subgenre. Again, we're talking about academic readings to help us continue to make predictions. And of course, thinking about how information is organized. Now, this is where we're going to begin this morning. So we are going to look more at this idea about organization in just a moment, because organization is very much connected to the structure of academic readings. Okay. And again, the more experience we have, the more we start to see how these things work together. Now, this session and in our next session, we're going to focus a lot on the things we do after we read. After we look at this information, what do we do with it? Well, of course, we have to recognize its organization by thinking about what is the main point of the reading? What ideas are included in the article? Those are not always easy to see when we read for the first time. So again, words like thesis, right? We're going to review that idea. What are the reasons that the writer is including? Maybe some ideas or supporting details. Now, this will help us in thinking about that 3-part structure. Most academic readings are organized in this way. Later, we'll talk about the graphic organizer. So we discussed that back in the fall. And then finally, in our next session, we're going to talk a lot about what we do to summarize information. So we'll see those things a little bit later as we continue in the spring. But today we're thinking about really this first part. This is what we're going to be looking at for the next several weeks. How we identify the thesis and the reasons and the things that the author is trying to prove to us, right? To show us what are the ideas in the text. Okay, now before we begin, let's think about some things we talked about in the fall. And that was in the idea of how the genre can very much influence how information is organized, right? So let's take a look at that. And I'm going to ask you guys to help me with this next part. All right, so Carmen, would you like to read this first slide for us of signal words and genre?
Yes. Genres often follow certain organizational ideas. From those ideas come specific signal words to help put the ideas together.
Okay, so would you read that question for us?
Question: how would a science topic, example, volcanoes or the life cycle of a plant, be organized compared to a history topic?
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Now let's open it up for discussion here for the class. So do we think that a science article would be organized the same way as a history article? What do you think about that? So Blanca, what do you think? Do you think science and history would be organized the same way?
No,
Well-
because history has the year, dates, exact dates,
Right?
and volcanoes, like it goes in a different direction, and yeah.
Yeah, so for example, we may learn about the history of volcanoes, we don't know, but if we're thinking about the process of a volcano, Blanca, do you have any idea how volcanoes work?
Well, I kind of know a little bit for the earthquakes that move the earth, and
Right,
then yeah.
Yeah, in fact, right now in Iceland, we've talked a little about Iceland in other classes. Iceland has had a couple of volcanic eruptions. Have you guys seen this on the news? They've actually had 2 or 3 and where the volcano has erupted and people have had to, leave their cities and places like that. Now, Blanca, I think Mexico has some volcanoes too, right?
Yes. Yes.
And have you seen any of the volcanoes active, like shooting up
Mm.
the lava? Have you seen that before?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea to stay away from it, right?
Yes, it's a lot of people. I think it is beautiful to see that, but
Sure.
I think they take it for granted,
Hmm.
like how dangerous it is. Yeah.
Yeah, they might say, "Oh, this is like watching a movie," and it's not
Yeah.
a movie, right? It's okay. Carmen, have you seen an active volcano before?
No, very close, but I lived a long time in a city in Mexico called Puebla.
Yeah.
In Puebla is a Popocatépetl. And when I lived there, it was active and
Wow.
was very hard and scared because a lot of people live very close.
Hmm. Yeah. So we often have this danger of if the volcano erupts, people
Yes.
have to evacuate, right? Leave the area. Yeah. Believe it or not, guys, in 1980, in the United States, there is a volcano called Mount St. Helens in Washington, and it erupted. In fact, it shot up in the sky, and it was almost like snow, right? The ash that was falling to the ground. So this did happen in America, in the United States. But of course, when we're talking about plants or volcanoes, those are mostly processes, right? They're usually steps to this process. What happens first? What happens next? So, for example, Sakurako, would you mind reading this example of a life science organization for us?
Okay. Life sciences are often organized as a process. Example, life cycle of a plant. We see words such as first, next, etc. They may also use examples and definitions to explain complex scientific terms to the reader. Example, photosynthesis,
Yeah. Do you remember photosynthesis from school, Sakurako?
like right side, wrong one? I'm
What
not sure.
Well, for example, photosynthesis is how, plants take the sunlight and convert it into energy, right? For their lives.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. For example, that's why plants, you get that green color, right?
Mhm.
Well, anyway, I'm not a scientist, so let's not talk about it. Okay. But the basic idea is, generally we see pictures like this, right, guys? Look at the screen there. We usually see that cycle. We see where it begins, where it ends. Again, I don't understand anything here on the screen, but the idea is mostly sciences are organized by process. Often there are new words that they're trying to teach us. They give us definitions and examples. So science, of course, is organized in this way, and these are the types of signals we see. All right, now, Blanca, you did a good job explaining the history one, so would you like to read this for us?
Yeah. History chronological organization.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you. Historical topics are often organized in a chronological
Very
way
good.
that is, they use
Signals.
of time to help organize the ideas in the text. They might also use sequence signals to show how one event or idea follows another.
All right. Yeah. So thank you, Blanca. Now, so history, of course, we'll see lots of different signals in lots of different readings, but in general, I think you were correct, Blanca. Most history topics are organized by time. Like we said, events or years. In fact, we may even focus on which events are more important than other events. But the general idea of history is they're organized in this way. Okay. All right. Now, guys, that's the first thing I want us to think about here, because what we have been looking at, so this is now kind of coming back to our discussion about our 3 readings, okay, the public health announcements that we were looking at. So the basic idea here is all 3 of our readings last session could be considered public health announcements. So you guys did all of this work back in January, right? We looked at the 3 readings. We decided, oh, these are all maybe public service or public health announcements. Now, I'm going to share with you now where they actually came from. Now, I did not write these articles. These were not written, by just a website, an English class website or something like that. These were actually real documents. They were adapted from official papers written by institutions that have some connection to the United States government. So these were, taken from real documents published by health organizations, maybe made a little bit easier to read or maybe simplified a little bit. But the truth is they were from real sources. So the first thing we need to think about is, what is the purpose of these organizations? Well, the idea is to give health to the public. That's exactly what you said. Now, we were kind of discussing, well, what do we mean by the public? Do we mean just, mothers or fathers? Is it just for, those parents, for example? And we said, no, anybody can be the public, especially people who are not medical professionals. Now, just to let you know, this is where these articles came from. So, for example, the Flu Facts article came from a place called the Centers for Disease Control. Now, you might be familiar with the CDC, those letters, CDC. They were the ones, of course, giving a lot of the COVID information. And, of course, some of that COVID information maybe was wrong at the beginning, or they had to change a lot of information. That happens a lot with science, right? Science often has to change information. So in this case, the Centers for Disease Control, yeah, it's kind of an organization that collects information, publishes information, but of course things change, right? I mean, that is the reality. Now, food allergies, as you can imagine, is from a food organization. You may have heard of the United States Food and Drug Administration. They're the ones who often inspect food for its safety. And of course, again, it's not a perfect organization, right? They make lots of mistakes, but the idea in general is they're responsible for checking these particular things. And then finally, the value of sleep is from an organization called the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. In fact, disorder, if you notice that word disorder, it sounds kind of negative. Well, that's because in the article, we were learning about some things that affect our sleep. So in this case, that makes sense, right? That this would come from this type of organization. So all three of these organizations are public health organizations. Some are maybe more scientific, some do more research, but for the most part, they publish information to give to the public. And of course, one problem is, does the public always know how to read this information? That's a big problem, I think, for people in general. Because sometimes when they publish this information, it's hard to understand, right? I mean, let's be honest. It's not so easy to understand all of the scientific information. So that's something we're trying to learn here in this class. How can we be better at reading this kind of information? Now, I have some questions for us. Okay, so let's open this up for our first discussion. So how do you think about what we've seen these articles now. We've seen them just, maybe not too deeply, but we have seen these articles. So let's open with this first question. How do you think these kinds of announcements are organized? So how do we generally organize these? Guys, can you think about the articles we've read so far? How would you describe their basic organization? So for example, what do they talk about? Let's think for a moment about like the flu facts. So how would we say it's basically organized? Who has a thought? What do you think? Where do they begin? Yeah, Sakurako?
I think there is some symptoms by flu.
Okay. So for example, do we start with the symptoms or do we start maybe with a definition?
Maybe definition.
So what are we talking about when we say the flu, right? What is the flu, right? And then maybe we see a list of symptoms. Okay, that's good. That's good. All right. Okay, what else? What else do you think we might see? So after the symptoms, what do you think, guys? Carmen, Blanca, what do you think? You've had the flu before, right?
Yes.
So what do you think? And the kids, yeah, those kids, they always get sick. So what do you think? So we've got the definition of the flu, Carmen. We've got the symptoms. What do you think might come next?
Information about how we need to do for take care of and stay safe at home.
Yeah, so maybe how to treat the situation.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, we certainly want to know why. I mean, thank you for telling us about the flu, but what can we do? Yeah, we just want to scare people and then say, well, goodbye. Yeah,
they giving us some directions for how we can try this in the good safe.
Okay, good, Carmen. And so Blanca, here's a question for you, Blanca. Do you think the way we treat the flu today might be different from 100 years ago?
Yes, every year is completely different because there is kind of difference. Flutes like B and what's the A or B? Yeah, there isn't. Yeah,
Z, X. I have no idea. Yeah, there are lots of different
every
flus,
year
right?
is completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, we hear things like the bird flu,
Yes.
Those are all very scary. All right. Yeah. Okay. Now, guys, you've done a great job in thinking about how we generally would organize this information. So, again, these types of announcements. Now, I put up here at the top PHA. You might remember the letters PSA. PSA stands for Public Service Announcement. I would say these are probably not necessarily public service announcements. Public service announcements generally tend to focus on things we focus on every day or daily issues. Public health announcements often might deal with, like the flu, for example. If it's flu season, right, we might see this at a specific time of year. But for example, you did a great job in thinking about, first, we'll probably have some brief description of the topic. What maybe a definition of the problem, or is it a health emergency? Is it a medical condition? Sakurako mentioned the symptoms. Well, how exactly do we know what's the flu compared to something else? Carmen mentioned how to deal with the problem, what kind of treatment plan. But I also think Blanca made a good point. the latest research. And that's because, like you said, the flu, well, it's not always the same, or at least there are variations or changes that might happen from year to year. So we might see some research on this topic as well. All right. So excellent work, class. All right. Now, I'm going to teach you today what we call this kind of organization. So we had the life sciences, right? A process or a cycle. We had history, time. This happens. This first. This came this year, this year, this year. All right, now class. This type of organization, and it is a very common organization in academic writing, is called a breakdown organization. So you can say that there at your phone or computer. Breakdown. Okay. Now you might say, Mr. John, breakdown. That sounds so negative, like an emotional breakdown. No. That's not what this means. Guys, do you notice the shape I'm using on the screen? What shape is that, by the way? What do we call this shape? Who can tell me? What shape is it?
Triangle.
Triangle. Okay, so you guys have passed basic English. Congratulations. Okay, you got it. So now you might say, Mr. John, why is the triangle in this direction? Why is it upside down? Usually we think of triangles facing up. Well, let me explain why. And I think this is a nice visual way to think about this. You see, typically we take these big topics. So, for example, the flu. That's a pretty big topic, isn't it? Okay. And then what we do, by starting with a general idea, we begin to break them down into more specific parts. We start with a big idea, and then slowly we kind of go through, well, for example, here's a definition. All right, that's still kind of general. But then here are some symptoms. Okay, now that's more specific to this idea of the flu. And then maybe we get to, like we said, the current situation, research. That would be much more specific. So what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that many academic topics, many of them, are organized like this. They give us an idea or a big word or concept, and then they start to give us examples, ideas. They start to break them down into different parts. Now, of course, when they break these things down, they organize them in different ways. We'll talk more about that as we continue. But often they will start with what they might consider to be the most important information, and then maybe becomes less important. Or they might start with something that's very general and then get more specific. Or they might include just particular reasons or ideas that we need to know that kind of help tell us more about the general topic. So, for example, for the flu, I mean, we're just using that as an example. For the flu, we might think about, for example, different kinds of flu. Blanca mentioned this year's flu A or flu B or whatever. Well, maybe there are different kinds of flu that we see, particularly this year, that might be different from other flus that we see also in the same time period. So again, we could break things down in many different ways. So what I want you to think about here this session, many academic writings follow this organizational pattern. Sometimes they do it for the whole reading. Sometimes from the beginning to the end, they follow this kind of breakdown. Or sometimes they use it just for parts of the reading. We'll take a look at how that works as we continue in this session. But I want you to think about this. Many of the things you're going to read, now maybe thinking about tests, like for example, the test we give in our English classes, the GED, for example, high school, university preparation, those kinds of things. Many of them will follow this organization. So again, we're talking about things like social sciences. Well, that's what we're looking at, is kind of a social science, not just medical science, but also thinking about psychology, for example, or sociology. The arts and humanities. Now, of course, arts can include a little bit of history, sure. But many times when we're learning about art, we often learn about ideas. Oh, here's this particular idea or this particular period of time, and then explaining what's interesting or unique about it. And of course, other topics like philosophy. philosophy deals a lot with concepts and ideas and then breaks them down into more specific parts. So what I'm trying to show you here in this session is that many of the things we read will follow this kind of organization, a breakdown organization. They'll start with more general ideas and eventually become more specific. Okay, so guys, I want you to think about that picture of the upside down triangle. That might help you understand more when we look more carefully at these different readings. Okay? So, as I said before, we will revisit this breakdown organization a lot during this session because all three of the readings are kind of following the same ideas. They're public health ideas. All right, let's talk about this next question. Okay, so again, this is kind of up for discussion. What kind of signal words do you think we're going to see? So in a public health announcement, what kind of signal words do you think we're going to see? Now, I'm going to bring up for just a moment, this is the list of signal words we have been using in this session. In fact, we've added some signal words as we've continued, right? Signals of frequency. We talked about signals of approximation. Now, I'll be clear, many of these that you see here, for example, addition, approximation, frequency, we can see these signals anywhere, right? We can see them in any kind of reading. Maybe even signals of cause and effect, right? We may see a lot of those in many different kinds of reading. But guys, I'm going to ask you, which of the signals do you think we're going to see in this kind of reading, in a breakdown kind of organization? Take a look, guys. Which ones do you think we might see?
Signals of sequence of order.
Possibly. Possibly. We might see what to do first or next if we're sick, right? If we follow a treatment plan.
Signals of time.
Maybe not. These are, if you think about it, many of these are not organized by time like a history article. History articles often use time signals. Now, Carmen, we might see some signals of time, yeah, but I don't know that they're organized by time. Think about organization. Think about organization.
Definition.
Yeah, I think definitely we'll see definitions because we'll see lots of words maybe we don't know. And remember, the purpose of these articles is to educate the public. Now, everyone here says, Mr. John, I know what the flu is. I know what the flu is. Okay. Do you think everybody knows what the flu is? Think about it for a moment. Think about it. Do you know? I mean, how do you know it's the flu compared to something else? Guys, we've had COVID, right? COVID has been around for a few years now. How do we know it's COVID and not the flu? How do we know it's pneumonia compared to something else? Do you guys know? Are you medical experts? Do I have any medical experts here today? Anyone? No? What? Carmen, you're not a doctor?
No, but this sometimes is you think, maybe I have the flu, but no, it's an allergy.
Yeah, or a sinus infection or a cold. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so in this case, part of the purpose is to tell us what the flu is and maybe what other things might be too. So I think in this case, Sakurako, I think definitions are definitely what we're going to see. They're going to define what the flu is and maybe what those symptoms mean too. Okay, what else, group? What other signals do you think we're going to see?
Comparison.
Probably comparing, certainly. Yeah, because again, just like Carmen said, is it the flu? Is it an allergy? So maybe we'll compare. What else? I think there's one that we'll definitely see.
Signals of examples.
I think that's going to be the big one because we need to know, well, what does this flu look like compared to this flu? So I think we'll definitely need to see examples of these things. Breakdown organizations often will give us a definition and then will show us, for example, through example, right? They'll give us ideas to compare by using examples, right? Okay. Now, let's look at the others very quickly. Now, could we see signals of time? Of course. Could we see signals of order? Possibly. Signals of identification? Do you think we might see signals of identification? What do you think? No thoughts? Maybe we'll put a question mark next to it. Okay. Of course, punctuation signals, I think we can agree, we can see punctuation signals again anywhere. But what I want you to think about here this morning is as we get more and more experience reading different kinds of articles, reading different kinds of readings, we will see more and more of the sort of examples of signals that we might associate with each type of organization. So again, signals of time, those are more history articles, right? Signals of sequence or order, well, maybe a process or following steps. Now, of course, Carmen, it's possible that in the article it might tell us how to take medicine. Do this first, do this next. Those seem a little more specific, I think, for medical information. These are just kind of public health ideas. So I don't know that we'll see many signals, but I definitely think we'll see definitions. I definitely think we'll see examples and probably comparison as well, among others. So in thinking about our list, this is what I pretty much thought of: definitions, examples, identification, and comparison. I definitely think we'll see lots of those as we continue, but also thinking about how they help in organizing the ideas. Okay? All right. Now, guys, we'll continue to refer to those signals as we go along. But now let's move on to the next topic to discuss. All right. So, class, let's ask the first big question of this part of the presentation. What do you remember about the three-part structure? So, for example, can we remember what those three parts are? What do we mean when we say the three-part structure of an article? Who can remember? Any ideas? Or was that so long ago we've forgotten everything?
Introduction,
Okay, we have an introduction.
conclusion,
There's the conclusion. All right, that's two.
middle one.
And the middle part, Mr. John. Like the peanut butter in the middle of the sandwich. All right, how about I give you a hint? Okay, so we have introduction, right? That's the first part. Conclusion is the last part. I'll give you a hint. The middle part starts with the letter B. Starts with the letter B. And it's not peanut butter with a B.
Body.
There you go. I knew you would remember it. Yeah, so if you think about it like a person, right, that's the idea. The head would be the introduction. The middle part, the kind of the heart of the article, is the body. And yes, the conclusion. Now, we learned that back in the fall. And I know that seems a long time ago, right? You probably don't remember what you had for breakfast today. So we're going to review these ideas in the context of our readings. And of course, as we continue along, we'll see that these three ideas, introduction, body, and conclusion, are not exactly going to be just, this paragraph or these paragraphs or so on. I want you to think about these, again, as more ideas. An introduction introduces the article. Now, usually it's the first paragraph, but not always. So as we go through here reviewing these three parts, we're going to use our most recent article, The Value of Sleep, to identify these three parts. Okay? Now, again, we're just kind of using our guesses about these three things. As we kind of go back and read the article again, we may change our mind. But I'm going to ask Blanca if you'll help us here. Can you read the introduction for us?
The introduction of an academic article often includes a hook or an interesting first idea to get the reader's attention. A general overview of the topic should be discussed, usually with a statement called a thesis, which gives the main idea of the test. The thesis will often be at the end of the introduction. Note: the introduction usually includes the first paragraph, though it could sometimes include the next paragraph as well.
All right. Thank you, Blanca. Now, again, most of what we do, like, again, we're talking kind of in the context of taking a test, right? The test that we use for our English classes, the GED, academic tests that you might take for the university. Most of the time, the introduction will be the first paragraph. Most of the time, but not always. It might include the next paragraph as well. So we're going to take a look at this here in just a moment. What do we mean when we say the introduction? What do we mean by the thesis? How can we find the thesis? And of course, going back to the first part, what exactly is a hook? How can we know that it's something just to get our interest compared to what the article is going to talk about? Because sometimes the hook gives us interested in the reading, but it's not necessarily going to be the main idea of the reading. All right, so let's continue on. So Sakurako, since you remembered the body, you get to read it. All right, so Sakurako, please read this next part.
The body of an academic article often includes reasons that help back up the thesis from the introduction, important details that support the reasons of each paragraph. The body usually includes the middle paragraphs of an article.
Yeah, so you mentioned that before, right? So that's the peanut butter, yeah, in the middle. All right, thank you, Sakurako. Now, we're not going to look too much at the body today. We're going to continue this in our next class, looking more at these ideas. But the basic idea is if you can identify the introduction, probably identify the conclusion, the body would be that middle part. Okay, and again, the body really is the most important part of the reading. That's where most of the information is included. Now, obviously, depending on what we're reading, a history article, a science article, an arts and humanities article, they're going to use these three-part structures in slightly different ways. But in general, we can think of it this way, right? We introduce the topic, then we kind of explain the topic in the body, and then Carmen, we've got the last part, the conclusion. Would you read this part for us, Carmen?
Okay. The conclusion of an academic article often includes a summary idea of the information discussed throughout the body of the article.
Good.
A concluding idea that may add an interesting thought or idea to complement the thesis and or provide an appropriate ending to the article. The conclusion is often the final paragraph of an article, though it may include more than one.
Thank you, Carmen. So again, generally, the conclusion will be the last paragraph, but again, not always. Sometimes a writer might use 2 paragraphs to conclude an article. Now, that all sounds very confusing. You're thinking, Mr. John, I mean, is it 1 or 2? Is it is the introduction 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs? Is the body, 3, 4? How, again, I cannot answer that question because introduction, body, and conclusion are ideas. Okay, they're not always going to be specifically just 1 paragraph. It's possible most of the time these academic articles that we read on these tests will follow these types of organizations, but not always. So that's what I want you to think about. Now, of course, we don't have to know what they are at the beginning. When you're reading at the time, it's not always easy to know, is this the introduction? Are we finished with the introduction and now we're talking about the body? Are we now at the conclusion of the article? That's not always easy to know. So don't worry, guys. You don't have to know all of these things now. But what I do want us to think about is how do they relate to our readings. And sometimes, just to give you a little hint, we can often look at them in a visual way to start making some guesses. Now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to bring back the article, The Value of Sleep, but the way that it appears on their website. Okay, now, usually when we're doing reading in class, I usually give you, one paragraph at a time. I think we can agree it's much easier to read that way. If I were sharing this document on the screen, I don't know about you guys, but this is what I'm doing most of the time. Okay, so Blanca, I know we're the old people in the class. Do you do this, right, when you're reading? No, she, yeah.
Yes.
That's okay. We don't have to say how old we are, right? We don't have to say that. But I'm sure Sakurako and Carmen, you're too young to have this problem, right? Of course. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Carmen's thinking about that one. Okay. All right. Don't worry. I'm not going to ask. Okay. Not going to ask. But look at the screen, everyone. Now, if we just had to make some guesses, okay, I'm just going to show you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my annotation tool just real quickly. It's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to use a yellow color so we can see it a little bit easier. But I'm just going to put a number. Okay, so for example, there's number 1. Okay, and I'll make it bigger. Okay, so for example, if I put a number 1 next to this paragraph, that would be considered paragraph number 1, right? And then here's 2, right? Do we get the idea? Okay, here's 3. Okay, so we'll move that one there. Here's 4. Okay, here's 5. 6 and 7. Okay, so as you can see, 7 paragraphs, which is, if you might remember, that's how I divided them when we were reading it last session. All right, now let's just make some guesses. Okay, we don't have to be correct. We could be completely wrong when we're reading. But if we just had to make a basic guess, so we have 7 paragraphs. 7's a pretty interesting number. That's a lot of paragraphs. Now, without even looking at the reading, let's just make some guesses. So my advice is let's start with the last part of the reading, the conclusion. So if I think about the conclusion we might say would be maybe paragraph number 7. Okay? So for example, we're just going to guess that 7 is the conclusion. Okay? All right, now working backwards, which one do you think would be the introduction? This should be hopefully easy. Which one?
The number 1.
Okay, so maybe number 1 might be the introduction. Okay, so I'll summarize there. All right, so now guys, this is not math class, okay, but let's use a little math. If paragraph 1 is the introduction and paragraph 7 is the conclusion, then which ones might be the body? What do you think?
2 to 6.
All right, so Sakurako is guessing 2 to 6 would be the body. Okay. All right. Now, don't worry, Sakurako, this is not Las Vegas, so we don't have to bet. So don't worry, you're not going to lose any money if you bet here. Now, these are all just guesses. We're just looking at the structure of the article, and we're thinking, okay, maybe that's a lot of paragraphs for the body, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I mean, that's 5 paragraphs explaining this reading. Now, I think those are all very appropriate guesses. Now, as we get more detailed, though, as we look more closely, it's possible, though, that maybe the introduction is more than just the first paragraph. And I'm going to give you a suggestion why. Part of it is how we connect information and how they're kind of related to each other. Now, keep this information here. Okay, we'll come back in just a moment. But I want to go back to my presentation. And I want us to think about, there we are. I want us to think about this next idea, because this might help us in thinking about where the introduction begins and where it ends. So let's talk about the thesis. Now, as I stated back in the fall, the thesis kind of gives us an idea what the main idea is. What are we trying to prove? It gives us a direction for the entire reading. Now, as I said before, usually we find the thesis at the end of the introduction. Now, if we think about our activity, the one that we just did, if we think about that, then we might think that the thesis would be the last line of paragraph number 1. All right, now we're just guessing. Now, we'll come back to this in just a moment. Okay, so guys, keep that in mind. The thesis would be probably the last sentence of the first paragraph. Notice the thesis is often one sentence, but it could be more than one. Sometimes the writer might use the thesis in 2 sentences or 3 sentences. Now, this last point I think is really important. The thesis is broad enough that it covers more than just a specific example or detail. Now, we're going to talk about this now, because I think this is the clue in helping you find the thesis. I think it's going to help you almost as much as the first idea, looking for the thesis at the end of the introduction, because the thesis is usually going to be about something a little bigger than just specific ideas. Okay? Now, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, because here's what I want you to do. We're going to return to the article for just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to switch back here for just a moment. Now, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom into paragraph number 1. Okay, so it's kind of hard because we've got all this stuff here on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can move this stuff. Okay. Okay. All right, now, everyone take a look at paragraph number 1. Now, I'm going to read it. And if we think this is the introduction, I will underline what we think is the last line of the introduction. Okay, so I'm going to read the first paragraph. Although scientists are trying to learn why people need sleep, animal studies show that sleep is necessary for survival. Rats normally live for 2 to 3 years. However, those deprived of REM sleep survive only about 5 weeks. Rats deprived of all sleep stages live only about 3 weeks. Okay, now class, I'm going to ask you an important question. Do you think that is the thesis of this entire article? That rats deprived of all sleep stages live only about 3 weeks? Is that the thesis? Is that the main idea of this article?
No.
No. It seems too specific, doesn't it? Carmen, do you really want to learn about rats and all their sleep stages?
No.
No. In fact, if I look at the title of the article, it says the value of sleep. It doesn't say the value of sleep for rats. So, maybe the first paragraph is not the only paragraph. Let me read the second paragraph. Okay, group, take a look at the second paragraph. Okay, so let's move number 2 over here. Sleep-deprived rats also develop low body temperatures and sores on their tails and paws. The sores may develop because the rat's immune systems become impaired. Studies suggest that lack of sleep affects the immune system in detrimental ways. All right, group, what do you think? Do you think paragraph 2 might also be part of the introduction?
Yes.
Okay, why? Why do you think that, Carmen?
Because in the second part is more important than the first.
Certainly we're getting more specific, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, let's get Sakurako and Blanca's opinion here. All right, so what do you think? Sakurako, what do you think? Do you think the introduction might be paragraph 2 might be part of the introduction too?
I think so too.
Okay, and why do you think that?
Mm, second paragraph is more example of rats.
Yeah, again, do you think this whole article is about rats?
No.
No, we've seen the article, right? We've looked at it. I don't think rats are talked about any other place. I mean, I don't know about you, Sakurako. I feel bad for the rats, right? I feel sorry for them, but I don't really want to read about them. Do you want to read about them?
Hmm?
Do you want to?
About poor rats?
Yeah. Do you want to read about? No, probably not. I mean, it's a sad thing, of course. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So let's see if Blanca agrees. Blanca, are you going to make this a perfect agreement? Do all three of us agree? Blanca, do you think paragraph 2 might be part of the introduction?
Yes, yes, they got the continue the well, it give you more specific information what the scientists are trying to explain to the people that they what the study that they had with the rats
Mhm.
the conclusion say that they live less.
Yes. Okay. Now that's the thing. I think you did a very good job identifying. I think we can now say that maybe the introduction is not just the first paragraph. In fact, it might be paragraphs 1 and 2. All right. Well, class, congratulations. You are correct. The first 2 paragraphs are the introduction. So, class, if we think the thesis is included in the introduction, where is it? Where do you think the thesis might be for this article? What do you think it might be? Carmen?
In the last 2 sentences,
About the sores or about the studies?
studies.
Okay, so I think maybe you mean the last 2 lines.
Yes.
Yeah, be careful because the sentence is where the period is. So I think in this case, let's see if you're correct. Now, of course, we were discussing rats, and you guys said, is this article mainly about rats? You all said, no, it's not. So we can skip that. But I do think you are correct, Carmen. I think the last sentence is a very good candidate. Remember that new word, candidate? Right. So I think the last sentence is a good candidate as a thesis. I think so. Now, do we know this for 100%? No, but we think it's a good candidate. And so what I'm going to suggest to you guys is let's keep that in mind as we continue reading. Now, our goal is not to read everything here today. Okay, that's not our goal. But the idea is if we think this is the thesis, well, let's take a look at it. Studies suggest that lack of sleep affects the immune system in detrimental ways. Now, do you guys remember the word detrimental? Anybody remember that word? If it affects it in detrimental ways, what do you think that means? Anyone remember that word?
Yeah, the immune system.
So how does it affect the immune system? So,
doing things in the bad way.
exactly. Yeah, detrimental is something bad. In fact, you might remember, Carmen, I mentioned next time you look at a pack of cigarettes,
Yes.
on the pack it says smoking is detrimental to your health. Yeah, so it doesn't mean it's good. Makes sense, doesn't it? Again, the title of the article is The Value of Sleep, how important sleep is. And if we don't get sleep, some bad things happen. I think we found a good candidate for our thesis. So we're going to keep that in mind. But now I have another question for you guys. Why all the rats? Why do you think the writer included these rat studies? Well, why did they do that? If this is not an article about rats, why are we reading about rats at the beginning of this article? Any ideas?
Yeah, because they are trying to do this exercise with rats and see the effects and try to compare with us and see what happen if we don't sleep enough.
Yeah, so you're thinking, well, wait a minute, what do we care about rats? Oh, wait a minute. Maybe there's some comparison that we can make. So I think, Carmen, I think we've pretty much thought about that rats do have some connection. In fact, I think it might relate to that first thing we were talking about with the introduction. If you remember, we called this the hook. The hook is what gets us interested in the reading. So, in thinking about the hook, right? So, guys, you ever been fishing before? Do we have any fisher people here in the class? Anybody enjoy fishing? No one's fitting to. Carmen says absolutely not. I don't know, Sakurako or Blanca, have you guys tried fishing before? No?
No, I went with my daughter one time for kindergarten,
Yeah?
and they gave me like 5 more kids, and I had to put the worm in the hook. Oh my God, that was the worst day ever. But I had to do it. So yeah, no.
It's always the bad thing, Blanca. The things we have to do for our kids, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think we're off to a good start in identifying that, yes, we think maybe the article starts with rats because there must be some connection. So, one possibility is that people might think rats are very different from people. But I think the article is showing us, especially at the beginning, that maybe not. Maybe they're not so different in some ways. Now, we're going to go back and see what we think those ways might be. But I think we've identified that, well, wait a minute. Rats? Why am I reading an article about rats? Well, I think in some ways this is what we would call a hook. It gets us interested in reading because we want to know, well, why are we talking about these poor animals, these poor rodents? Well, I think it's a way to get us interested in the reading. So that's what I want you to think about as we continue, because you're right. Let's bring back the article for just a moment. I'm going to bring back the larger one that we were looking at earlier. So in thinking about it, as I continue to look through the rest of the article, okay, so now we've identified that the introduction is probably paragraphs 1 and 2. So we'll kind of just highlight those. Okay. But as I continue, I'm just going to skim real quickly, and I'm going to see if I see rats anywhere else in this article. So I'm skimming, I'm looking through paragraph 3, I'm looking through paragraph 4, paragraph 5. Okay, I don't know. I don't see rats. I do see, for example, children. I see young adults. Right? I think that's important. I will continue looking through paragraphs 5 and 6. Okay. Uh-oh. Take a look at 7, everyone. Look very carefully. I'm going to zoom in. Okay. So let's move that over to the side for just a moment. All right. Now take a look at paragraph 7. What do you see?
The name of rats.
Yeah, in fact, how many places do we see it? Take a look.
2.
1, 2.
Yeah, 2. Interesting. Very interesting. So the article began with the idea of rats, and it looks like it's finishing with the idea of rats. That's very interesting. In fact, let's go back to the presentation for just a moment. If you'll remember that in the presentation, when we talked about the different parts of the reading, so the conclusion includes a summary, like summarizing the information. Notice what it says here, a concluding idea that may add an interesting thought or idea to complement the thesis and or provide an appropriate ending to the article. Now think about that middle point there, the point number 2 there. A very interesting way to kind of give you the feeling that the article is finished. We started with rats and we're finishing with rats. Now you might say, wait a minute, that seems rather strange. The middle part of the article was not about rats at all. Well, that's not the main idea. The main idea was talking about sleep. But I think the idea of the rats may help us give a feeling that we're coming back to the beginning of the article. This happens a lot, and we'll talk more about that when we get to next week, when we get to the more specific parts of the body and the conclusion. But I think we've done a great job so far this morning at looking at how we generally organize an article. So in coming back for the last time to the article, to what we've identified so far, okay. So in thinking about that, oops, sorry guys, I clicked on the wrong, there it is. So in clicking on that, I think we can at least say that it seems, we seem pretty confident that paragraph 7 might be the conclusion. And one of that reason is because it brings up the idea of rats again. That gives us a good direction that maybe the body of the article is, of course, the middle parts. So thinking about the body, now we might think maybe paragraph 3, 4, 5, and 6 might be what we think of as the body. So in reviewing what we've done so far this morning, we think that probably the first 2 paragraphs would be the introduction. Okay. That maybe the last sentence of the paragraph of the introduction would be the thesis. Okay. That the next part would be what we might refer to as the body. Okay. And that finally the last paragraph might be the conclusion. Now, these are all guesses, okay? These are all guesses. We're not 100% sure if we're correct, but this gives us a start when looking at the article in that way, okay? Now, my final point that I'd like to finish up here with this morning is the idea of organization. So I'm going to return to the presentation one more time. And just to review, when we think about the organization, that's something we're going to look at more of next week. And if you recall, we said that this would be referred to as a breakdown organization. Now, some of you noticed in the article that in the breakdown, we start with more general ideas and it starts to get more specific. So what I'd like to do before we leave here this morning is I want to go back to the introduction and I want to think about this breakdown type organization, how we start with more general information and how even in the introduction, we get to something a little more specific. So again, you all actually noticed it while we were reading. So let's go back and take a look at it. Okay. And then I think that's where we'll stop here for the morning. But I'm going to come back to the article. Okay. Now, again, I'm just going to use the one on the screen here. So what I'll do is I'll clear the ink, make it a little bit easier to see. In fact, actually, I might just go ahead and clear everything. And I'm going to zoom in just to the introduction again. Okay. Now, again, thinking about how the introduction is organized, let's think again about that shape. Remember the shape? The upside down triangle. Okay, so let's choose a green color for just a moment. Okay, so if we think about the shape, okay, now sorry guys, it's hard to draw this with my pen tool. The idea is, how do we start with a more general idea and how do we get more specific? So one thing we talked about was maybe how we use signal words to organize this information. So let's look a little more carefully at the reading. Okay, so I'm gonna remove that for just a moment. All right, so as we go through, we highlighted some signal words. So for example, although scientists, right? Rats normally live for 2 or 3 years. Then what do we see next? However, Okay, so that gives us a clue, doesn't it? So, Carmen, I think you mentioned it a few minutes ago. That word, however, what is it preparing us for? When I see that word, however, what do we think is going to happen next?
Comparing.
So we started with 2 to 3 years, and then what comes next?
About 5 weeks.
Aha. What's happening, Carmen?
About 3 weeks.
Do you see it? There it is. Now, do you see what's happening with our organization? We started with a general idea. Rats live this long. And then what happens?
This is reducing.
Gets more specific, doesn't it? If they don't do this, they have only about 5 weeks. If they don't do this, it's only about 3 weeks. Very good. You said it's sort of reducing the idea. Well, it's becoming more specific. Now, Blanca, I think you mentioned in the second paragraph that it gets even more specific. How did you know? Take a look at the second paragraph. What words do we see?
Also,
What does that mean, also?
it's like
Think of an example. How would you use it, also? In everyday life, how would you use it?
like it's a comparison between 1 and 2, yeah, like between one something and something else, but I don't know how to explain, like.
Well, for example, it's adding information, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
So the question is, what is it adding? Well, if we think about the sentence before it, rats deprived of all sleep live only 3 weeks.
So, but it give you more information. How did the rat is decreasing their body? Yeah.
In fact, it's not exactly an example, but it's giving us extra information, extra examples. So not only do they live fewer weeks, but they have lower body temperature. What other problems do we see?
Sores.
The sores. And in fact, what do you notice here?
And because
if you remember, we said that was a signal of cause and effect.
Yes.
Why do they get these? Because their immune systems. Oh, their immune systems become impaired. Interesting. So as we were looking through this information, you all correctly identified. We started with this big idea. Why do we have problems with sleep? What problems are there? So not just animal studies. In fact, take a look. The first sentence says animals. And then it becomes even more specific. Not just any animal, but rats. So unfortunately, right? And then from there, it gets even more specific. Like you said, Carmen, it kind of notices, we see this reduction of information. And in fact, as we continue to go through the introduction, it gets even more specific. So not only do they live less time, but then they have these health problems, sores, low body temperature. Oh, this is terrible, right? And then what's the thesis? The lack of sleep affects our immune system in detrimental ways. Very interesting. Now, class, before we finish here this morning, what do you think we're going to learn next? If this is the thesis, so as we think this might be the thesis, what do you think we're going to learn next? Don't think about specific things. What do you think? Make a prediction. What are we going to learn next?
What happened to our body when lack of sleep?
That's right. And Sakurako, can you guess?
Not enough moving our brain.
Well, for example, are we going to have sores on our paws and our tail?
I know.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think we have tails, do we?
No.
I mean, this is an online class. I can't see you guys, so I'm assuming we don't have tails, right? Okay. So it affects animals, but it might affect us differently. Is that right?
Yes.
Of course, of course. In fact, I think it's going to explain this word right here. How detrimental. What's going to happen? It's not going to be good. It's going to explain why sleep is so important. Now, I'm sure all of you think, Mr. John, it's obvious. Sleep is important because we need it. Yeah, but have you thought about what happens to us if we don't get sleep? I mean, yeah, you may get a little, you need coffee, right? Feel like you can't, concentrate or think, but it could be worse. Could be more serious. So that's where we're going to stop here for today, because now we're thinking about, well, how does the body of the article explain this information? So that's what I want you to think about, guys. As we're reading, sometimes it's hard to know all of this information. Well, again, I don't know what the introduction is. I don't know what the thesis is. I don't know until I read it. But then after we read, we can begin to start organizing the information. And that's what I want you to think about in this session. We're going to see how we can organize this information to make it easier for us to understand. Okay? All right. Well, guys, we're going to stop there for today. I'm just going to come back to the presentation real quickly. Now, for this particular session, I'm not going to assign that much homework. So what I'm just going to ask everybody to do, I'm going to share the article, especially the link to the article that we worked with last session. So the definitions and everything like that. So what I would just like for you to do for homework is just review the article. Okay, just look through it again. We've already most likely identified the introduction and the thesis, but I'd just like for you to make sure you're familiar with the article again, because we are going to do more detailed things with it next week. So I'll send you a link to the article complete with the vocabulary that we defined. But the idea here for the first class was I wasn't going to give you too much to do because I really want us to do most of our work in the session for this particular session. Okay? All right, guys. Well, we're going to finish up here now. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, I will send you that link when we're finished this afternoon. So, guys, we'll see you next time, March 13th.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
John.
Thank you.
All right,
Have a
guys.
good day.
You too.